Thank you for inviting me here today. Can you hear? I'm here? Okay. So my talk is about humanizing technology, and that to me is about people connecting. And so I'd like you all to come to the front so that you're all connected in some way and not separate into silos. That would be great. So if you could just move forward so we're not all spread out, that would be great. Okay, good. You can also stay where you are if you like. Everyone should feel comfortable. So hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Vivian. And it's truly a privilege, it really is, to be able to share my experiences with you, to tell you about what shaped me, not only as a founder, but also, as a human being. It's about 5 things. I thought about this when creating my talk. It's about my experiences as a child, the kinds of values that my parents instilled in me, and the experiences I had growing up as a daughter of an Army soldier. It's also about the education that I pursued. You rattled off those degrees, but really for me, those were opportunities to solve a problem and to learn more about myself and the world and its problems. So it's also about how that knowledge empowered me as a person, and how I feel now, then and now, that knowledge is power, and that the first step for people to change their lives and make their lives better is to seek knowledge and to apply that to their lives. And that's where the technology came in, much later now, for me. It's also about emotional intelligence. So how many people are familiar with that concept, emotional intelligence? Right, okay. So for me, it's really about being able to think about how you're thinking, and to be able to think about the emotions that are guiding your decisions in your work, in your family, in all social settings. It's about the awareness that you want to have about your environment. And I think that awareness is what can drive you to do things and pursue a vision. And then finally, it's about efficacy. Efficacy is about having a sense of purpose. And when you have emotional intelligence, you are aware of your situation, you have a problem that you want to solve, and you really feel intent on solving it, you have efficacy. And I think it's really important that people feel in their lives that they have a purpose. So before I go there, let me tell you where it all started. So how did I get here? Not here physically, I drove from Mountain View, but here in this place, being able to share with you my journey from being a high school teacher to the CEO of a Silicon Valley startup. Here. This is my mom and dad. My journey really started with my parents. This is Felicita Rustique and my mom, Merlinda Rustique. And I learned here the values that I have brought with me along the journey. And they've also been a support for me in this quest from a student. This is my mom, Merlinda Rustique. This is her after she graduated from college in the Philippines. She was an elementary school teacher, and she was warm and compassionate, and she had high expectations for her students. I remember when we lived in Hawaii and she was a substitute teacher, and she would how carefully she prepared her lesson and what was going to happen the next day for her students. She would create these name tags, right, so that she knew who the students were. They were so cute. They had yarn and a little smiley face on them. And I asked her, Mom, why are you doing all of this work? Why can't you do what my substitute teachers do, which is they get a list and they call out the names and everyone has to raise their hand. And she said to me something I think about when I'm meeting people who I don't know. She said, because I want them to know that I know who they are and that I care that they are there. She was a teacher, right? So she taught me how to care and the belief that everyone could succeed and that people had a name, and that name was important. And she modeled for me what it means to be a lifelong learner, something that is necessary if you want to be a founder. She turned to housekeeping when times were rough, and I'll tell you that story in a minute. So this is my dad. My dad, badass dad. This is him in Vietnam. He was 24 years old. He was in the Army, he was a soldier, and he was a medic. So he cared for people. You can imagine what that was like. He graduated from college in the Philippines, and the program sent him and other students on this agricultural program in Salinas. He arrived only to find that the job was to pick cabbages and strawberries in the field. So the program dissolved actually after there was a labor dispute led by this guy named Cesar Chavez. Okay? Yeah, and then he knew him, by the way. And so, he then, with a group of other co-workers, then enlisted in the Army in order to stay in the United States. So that was the 1960s, and he served there. So I learned from my dad, the value of hard work and also resilience and grit and caring for people in times of need. This is me and my sister and my brother. This is what we did. We took turns teaching. Apparently my plan was simply to work that day, if you could see it, and that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have no idea what that meant, but maybe there were 5 tasks, but it was worked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I developed a love for learning. I learned what I didn't know. We had a set of encyclopedias. They're in libraries, but we don't use them anymore. We use the web. And any kind of question, I would look it up, and it was alphabetized. So, that's what we do. We take turns teaching. This is my son, Oliver. And from him, I learned the joy of just diving in. So he was fearless about just playing with things, and sometimes we, as people, are kind of hesitant to go towards something that we don't know. He just went for it, and later, he's in college now. But later he went to accompany me for these demos, right? And so he handed out the business cards, and I said, hey, Oliver, your job is to just tell people what the company is about. And so he was excited, and he's handing out his business cards. And then much later, right, so I told him he should create a LinkedIn profile. I said, just create that and just put what you've done in high school. And so later, I looked at his LinkedIn page, and he had on the first bullet, talked with investors. And that's what, according to him, that's what I did. I talked to investors. I said, okay, you leave it there. So that's Oliver. So the history of my education. Each of the degrees that I have has a story. So if you could go to the next slide. So, the places you go. That I, as a child of an army, as an army brat, we moved around a lot. So I was born in Kansas. We went to California. Then we were stationed in Korea. Then we went to Virginia. Then we went to Hawaii. Then we went back to Kansas. So that was all of my childhood up until high school. So that lion over there, that's Lansing High School's mascot, the lion. Lansing is a really small town in Kansas with a lot of military students that went there, and there was a lot of diversity in that campus. I wouldn't actually call it a campus, but when in the school. But in Lansing, in high school, I was only one of 2 brown faces in the school. So my goal at the high school was to actually prove that brown-skinned people could actually do as well as white-skinned people. My dad always told me, because of the color of your skin, you will be expected to do less. So you have to work twice as hard. And so I worked twice as hard. His goal or his hope for me was that I was going to be the valedictorian. It was a goal of mine as well. And so I graduated from Lansing High School. I was valedictorian. And then I went to WashU in St. Louis. And there at WashU, I learned how to fail. I got a scholarship. It was a pre-med scholarship with chemical engineering. I don't know what I was thinking, but I assumed I thought I could do it. And so I failed. It was way too hard for me. The small school that I went to in high school, in Lansing, wasn't rigorous enough to get me through that program. And I remember thinking, how could I graduate and be valedictorian and not be prepared for this program? And I was angry. I said, I wish I could be taught in the way that my college professors were teaching me. They were asking me my opinion. They were asking me for evidence. They were asking, me what I thought. And I realized in high school, that's not what I was doing. I was basically giving the teachers what they wanted to hear. And so, as a result of that, I think, I didn't grow as a learner, and at WashU I did. So I graduated from WashU, and I actually want to do a shout out because one of my best friends from college is here, and it's Michael Schwartz. He's visiting, and he's also actually an entrepreneur of a tech company, and they're based in Austin. I'll tell you about Mike in a little bit, but he is one of my biggest sources of information and support. He's always sending me links to articles, and I'm just so glad that I can actually. I think it's the first time he's heard me do this type of a talk. So thank you, Mike, for being here. So I went on after WashU, and I had failed out of pre-med. And I was looking for something that I could do well. I mean, this was my first time, experiencing failure. I was depressed, and then I thought, let me try political science. And so I majored in political science. I really wanted to understand, how the systems work and law, and I thought I would be a lawyer. But then I said, I'm not going to do that because I have to take this thing called the LSAT. I don't want to take the LSAT. I don't like standardized tests, and I was even thinking about it, and my heart started pounding. So I actually went into the School of Education. I said, I think I want to be a teacher. And the woman was great. The professor, Lauren Sosniak, she passed away, unfortunately. But she said, let me talk to you. And so she had a program in urban education. And she was telling me about how, this would be great for you, and you'd really, have an impact on the students. And so I said, sign me up. And so I joined the teacher training program for social sciences, social studies. And in the program, I had to do these visits. And so I went to one of the schools. It was called Sherman Elementary School in East St. Louis. And there was a classroom and full of African American students, and they were doing all of this amazing work, right? They were talking about, what the skills were needed for the things they wanted to do. So Markia wanted to be a journalist. They were talking about, okay, she needs to be able to write, she needs to be able to speak. They were going through the jobs that they wanted to be. I thought, this is great. And then suddenly, I had this sort of feeling like, oh my God, like the shadow just crossed. I realized that I would not have felt this way if the students, were white. I realized that I had in me this unconscious bias. And here I was going to be a teacher, and I was carrying this with me. So it was a pivotal moment in my life to realize that, with all my upbringing and awareness of, race and gender, that I myself was holding this bias. And so I vowed to myself that, I'm going to question these things when I have an opinion, like where it comes from. And that was kind of the start of one of the skills that I use a lot, which is metacognition. So I'm always thinking about how I'm thinking. So at Teachers College, I was in New York. I taught there. I learned how to not only teach, but I taught in an experimental high school. This was a high school that was featured in National Geographic. It was a classroom that it was a school that launched thousands of charter schools. It was the first model, and I was so fortunate to be in the school because it was completely like no other high school. There were no grades. It was just qualitative assessment. There were no freshman, sophomore, junior. They had just kind of collapsed all that, and the principal said, I just think that when we're adults, we don't sort ourselves by age, so why should we sort our students by age? She had all kinds of revolutionary, I thought, ideas about learning. And that's where I learned, that structures can actually change expectations and experiences. And for the students, they really were able to speak their truth the way you graduate is with portfolios. And it was also a time when I thought, how could we scale? And that was the whole movement in New York, was to replicate these amazing high schools. And that was sort of the start of my thinking, how do you scale innovation? And I have a theory about why it's been so hard with public schools. But it's really a story about the complexity of social change and having to address so many things at the same time. So I went to London, and I did a degree in curriculum and teaching, and I was also interested in the system there. So it was one of the highest, what they call high stakes accountability system, where the students' performance was measured by these tests, and that would affect the school. And what I learned was that there had been this expulsion rate, and it had skyrocketed to 500%. So students were leaving in droves, and it's this sort of why is this happening? Well, this was the study I did, and we found out that what teachers were doing they were sorting students out, and they were just ignoring the low-performing students. They were focusing on the high-performing students. And so I learned there that a bad policy can make good people do bad things. So that was my experience in London. I then went back to Stanford, the Bay Area, to duplicate that study. You all know about this policy, or was it called No Child Left Behind? Yeah. So we were researching that and found the same thing, that teachers were not just actually excluding them to get their their grades up, but they were also doing it indirectly because they just didn't they were so busy trying to reach this goal and this goal that their teaching had changed. So it was no longer differentiated. It was more of this sort of one style, and if you didn't fit in, you were out. So teachers talked about how their own policy changed. So I want to just take an icebreaker. I do this because I tend to talk a lot. And I'd like you to just turn to someone on your right and talk and ask them, what is an experience in learning that you've had where you felt empowered? You think about that? A learning experience where you felt empowered. Does anyone want to share, maybe a couple, who exchanged their experiences of feeling empowered by learning? Anyone? I'm going to pick on my friend Mike.
Well, I mean, I don't know if this is learning, but I took a test called Myers-Briggs, and I took it. I was an editor at a newspaper in college, and we all took it together. And it was actually, I thought it was empowering because it gave me some insights into myself, which were helpful, but also into others, and gave me a strategy for how I could better communicate with them and collaborate. And I don't know, it was short, but it gave me some good insights.
Mike, I would say that's development of your emotional intelligence.
I realize there's other people out there who are different. Yeah.
How about you, Dante?
I have a better one.
Yeah.
So, I studied, I'm in technology, so I studied at a very young age, and ever since I, picked up my first book when I was like 13 on computers, programming, it's really opened up a whole new, career of, opportunities, and I got to do a lot of exciting things. My first internship when I was like 18 to now, now I'm a self-employed software engineer, AI professional. It's been, yeah.
Okay, sounds like your story is about self-empowerment. Yeah. You, a lifelong learner that, you just sought it out and you became empowered by what you learned yourself. Yeah, great. So, I think that, in a system, the lesson I have about this was that, there was a system that was creating kind of a dissonance in the classroom. And I think, you're going to find that. I think people find themselves in that kind of situation where you feel like, I'm not getting anything out of this, I'm getting these negative messages, and feel disempowered. But, you actually can. And I love that you shared that story, Dante and Mike, that these things that happen to you are ways that you can actually just grow, even if it's yourself. But you have to be intentional about it, and that's all I have to say. I'll talk about that later. It's just to be intentional and aware. So anyway, I finished my Ph.D. I actually brought it, so I just wanted to say so. Here it is. And when I defended it, I did this in London. They have a different system, but they had two people. One was an expert in this field of exclusion. They asked me, you wrote, let me tell you, Elle, you wrote 2 dissertations. So why did you write 2 dissertations? I said, well, you had to tell the story about what was happening on the ground through the voices of students and teachers, but I also had to tell the story of what was happening, at the policy level. And so that's what I had to do, because I wouldn't tell the whole story of why this exclusion was happening, why there was why schools were expelling so many students. And so at the time, I didn't really have a title for this. I said, when we're going to talk about it, and the theory and the title ended up being Toward a Contextual Theory of School Exclusion, a Multi-Layered View of the Interaction Between National Policies and Local School Practices. How about that? So this is really a book about bad policy, making good people doing bad things, and just the interaction of that. So the point here is, what I learned was to think about change in systems. And so, when you're, as an entrepreneur, and I'll tie this all together, is that, when you're making innovation, when you're trying to create change, especially for social impact companies, it's not just about what you design and the solution that you're solving it for, but the whole context in which that is going to be used, sold, in the whole context, we call it some product market fit. But the system is really important, especially for social impact, when you want to make change on a wide scale. Okay. So now I have another question, if you can answer this. So how many of you have ever been in this situation where you wanted to leave a tip, you're in a hotel or valet or bellman, and you didn't have cash? Right. Yeah, we've all been there, right? It feels awkward, you feel guilty. You kind of want to like hide from the person. It's not a good feeling. And when I talk to hotels about, and TipBrightly is a cashless tipping platform, I can say more about that. They talk about the emotions. They were surprised at how bad people felt. They're checking out, this is the last experience they had, and they felt horrible. So that's something that they hadn't realized, and that we as a cashless tipping solution talked about that and how they should consider the guest experience. So, we are a cashless society now, and there's some statistics there to just show you that this started in 2015 when I started this, this endeavor, and now it's even more so. So, how many people are carrying cash right now? Okay, you're carrying cash. Not bad, but it's, it's like about 25% of you. Yes, so this is what the cashless society has done. So it's created, a disproportionate impact on those who rely on cash-based income. And if you can go back one, yeah, that's all right. And this is where my mom comes into play, and why tipping and not being able to leave a tip was so important for me. So when I was at Stanford, we would go on research trips. So I traveled a lot, and I was always a big tipper. And I was rushing, right, to clean out, to get everything packed, do some things that were on a deadline on my phone, and I reached into my purse and I didn't have any cash. So this really bothered me, right? Because, I know that women make up 99% of housekeepers, that 80% of the service industry are women, and that women tend to spend their money on groceries, their children, the home. And, I knew this because my mom was in housekeeping for over 20 years. And I always knew when she earned tips, because she would come home and she'd say, "Hey, we're going to McDonald's." And sometimes it was Baskin-Robbins, some other places. But the point is, she used her money, she used her tips on us, and it mattered. Tips mattered. And I was doing a calculation, on the phone. I was wondering what tips she must have, how much she earned. But $5 then would be, I think, $15 now. So you can imagine, how much she was able to, feed us with this $1 with this tip. So that's what mattered to me, personally. But systemically, here's what was going on, right? So you had declining tips. You had the staff feeling really bad, they're plummeting morale, negative reviews because the service quality was being affected, hiring shortages were already happening, and were getting worse with COVID, and so you had this impact on the bottom line. And so you can see how just a loss of tips can lead to a loss of money for the business. And these are unintended consequences, in a system. Again, I think about the system. So here's what we developed. It's pretty simple. We have a QR code, and it's on hotel collateral. You scan it, and I'm curious, can people scan it and get this from this, or be able to look at it on their phone? Well, if you're able to do it, then you should see a screen that pops up. That's a tipping screen. And you can leave a tip for Isabella. So for the first time, a guest can know the name of the person who cleaned their room. So I was talking to my partner about, what TipBrightly does by that name, and we were talking about how it gives, how identity gives them power, and to be identified and have an identity through this name is a step forward, for helping staff to feel appreciated. So after that, you get to a rating screen. The guests can leave a rating and also feedback. And then after that, they can confirm it and they get a receipt for their tip. So it's a whole system where tipping and feedback and performance analytics are put together in one platform. So we've made it fast and easy and convenient, all that. And we're now actually in a lot of hotels across the country. We have a partnership with Kimpton Hotels, and also we're working on IHG, which has a whole chain, of hotels. So it really is making a difference. It's improving the average wage, and it's also increasing the frequency of their tips. How much time do I have?
5 minutes.
5? Oh my God. Okay. Listen, I'm going to post this on there and give it to you. So let me go back. Let's just breeze through this. So knowledge is power, all right, for me, and I think it is going to be for you. Let's go to the next one. So awareness is the greatest agent for change. So if you want to make change, that understanding the system, I think, is key for social impact. This was a pivotal moment in my development as an entrepreneur. I joined a community of technologists and investors, and here I learned that it is possible for a small company to take on a big company on Wall Street. So these are two companies that are the CEOs of companies you probably know. One is Robinhood, and the other is Affirm. So this was almost 10 years ago, and they were on their small companies, and look what they've become. All right, so we talked about this already, and let me talk to you about how we designed TipBrightly. So that platform that you saw, if you can fast forward, I learned about it through human-centered implementation at the design school at Stanford. And any one of you can actually go to the website and see these concepts, where you look at empathy, you look at how the problem is affecting the emotions of a person, you prototype and you test. It's a whole process that is accessible if you're looking to create a design that is human-centered. And this is how I thought about things now. I think about what's happening, what the feelings are involved, and how that can be a solution. And that's something that I think will inform entrepreneurs in thinking about what they want to do. So this is a diagram from 2015. I know you can't see it well, but it was my sketch of the vision. I really did vision the hotels, the different staff, and how they would leave a tip. And at the time, I didn't know what technology it was. Would it be NFC or Bluetooth? And I thought about the QR code. And back then, everyone said, what is that? And now, we have global awareness of the QR code. But back then, I did believe in the QR code. So here's some final tips and themes and takeaways. You go forward. Yeah, so a lot of this, as I realized, is really about sharing with you how I think about things. So, change starts with a vision. And if we had time, I would, ask you to share with the person next to you about, do you have a vision for something? It's very important. Next is knowing that, change has many pieces to it. With TipBrightly, it's an ecosystem. So we had to think about the guest and the employee and the employer and how that would all come together. And that was very hard. That's why it takes years to develop a product. Values are really important to us at TipBrightly. These all happen to be start with E's, but there is education and efficacy, and when you have these values, they really help you make decisions. So you're not saying if we should do this, but how we should do this, and that's what I call having a moral compass. What is guiding you with your with your moral compass? It should be values. Again, like leading. So I think when you lead, people sometimes lead with their brain. Here's leading with your heart. And that's something I do a lot with my team. Is I explain like how I'm feeling about something, and then what we should do about it. It's not the right way to do it, or I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just how I have done it, especially with a product like TipBrightly. Again, another plug for emotional intelligence here. The study showed that 90% of what sets the high performers apart is having high emotional intelligence. So if someone says to you, you're being emotional, you say, yes, I am. Okay. Yeah, so follow the yellow brick road. I'm from Kansas, and this is, I love this movie. It shows a lot. There are a lot of themes here to talk about, but for a bee to share that, just find that place and just stay on the road. And then next, keep going. It's really hard. It's really easy actually to give up. But when you're a founder, you have to keep going and be persistent. And you do that through a number of things, but really support from your friends, your family, everyone down there at the bottom. Are really critical at those times when you don't want to keep going, and they remind you. So this image is about the 9 lives of cats, and I think as a founder, we have more than 9 lives. We have, I don't know how many, Mike, 99? How many lives have you had?
One for every 6 months or so.
Exactly. So yeah, it's hard, but yeah, you have 9 lives, more than 9 lives, and it's still counting. I love that. All right, next. So in this process, there are things that happen, and they're beyond your control, but I just wanted to share some of the things that just came out, and they like either blockers or enablers. So Apple did this thing, under like not anyone knowing it, very quietly, they integrated the barcode reader into the camera. And no one knew about it until I was saying, we could do this. And so we didn't have a barcode reader, and our adoption went way high because of something that Apple did. And Stripe, this was a disaster, but we got through with it. And they thought we were a money transmitter provider because we exchanged money. They just shut us down, like not even said anything. So our whole system was down. People couldn't tip. And anyway, we got out of that because of some friends at Citibank. And then things happened with press. We didn't ask for it, but we got mentioned in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and then COVID. COVID hit, and who would know that this would bring the QR code and contactless payments to the forefront. So things like that happen. Be persistent. I mean, Mike and I were just talking about this, is something that Reid Hoffman says, is that persistence is the #1 predictor of a startup success. So to remind you, perseverance, tenacity, determination, resolve, resolution, those are all forms of persistence. And you just need to persist if you have a vision. Stay on it. You have to believe in yourself. I thought of you, Dante, when you were talking about your story, about just believing in yourself. And, sometimes you do feel like you're right there. You might fall, but just reach for it. And success can be defined in many ways as well. So think about that. The other thing is, and this is the core value of TipBrightly, is appreciation. So be grateful. Be grateful for what you're able to do, who's around you, whatever it is. You can always find something, is my opinion, to be grateful for, and appreciate those who don't give up on you. So friends like Mike, my partner Dan, people, my mother, my sister, they don't give up on you, and you'll find people that help you through that process. Appreciate them. So finally, I think this was just stuck in here, but here's a piece of feedback. It really exemplifies why we're different from any other system. So the feedback there was from a guest. And just look how detailed that guest went into. I think he stayed there for time, because I asked the GM. But this is what it does. And so you can imagine, as a staff worker who's worked so hard to get this kind of feedback and feel appreciated. It's about a cycle of appreciation. You feel appreciated and others can appreciate you. This is what it looks like in real life. So Kimpton, I said, is a partner. This is the San Diego hotel called the Alma. That's actually how the card looks in their hotel. We worked so hard on the messaging and the language to use so that it didn't sound like tip solicitation. And just last week, we looked at all the employees and we gave certificates of appreciation for the top performers. That was exciting. So the other thing I want to say is, I talked about like thinking and all the stuff that's heavy, and also, how hard it is. So just have fun and celebrate your progress. So this is my part of my team, Rose, who is our director of operations, and Zia, who is our lead salesperson, and we were all on the visit, and we just had so much fun. Yeah. Okay, so I think we're not going to have time for an icebreaker. So thank you for being patient and letting me go over the time. I got so engrossed in telling my story, which means that I need to write a book, and that's what I'm going to do next. Thank you. Do you have any story? Do you have any questions? No time for questions? Okay.
We still have Q&A. John.
Yeah, do you still have Q&A? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If anybody has a question for Elle.
You're always asking me questions, Mike.
So I imagine a lot of people use this resource of this great community college to learn new skills and to retool and to continue learning. And as part of that learning experience, I bet you a lot of people come up with some new business ideas. And so maybe as a founder, you could talk about how do you filter through those new business ideas, because you only can choose one. Starting a business is such a huge effort. So how do you vet that business idea and know, is this something I should actually pursue?
So so for me, it's three things that I think will determine whether I go for a business idea. I mean, first, it really has to matter to you. This is like a long, enduring process where you'll start to question yourself. So it has to matter to you deeply. So that's one thing. The second thing is, it is resources. So what resources do you have to launch your business, to create it? If you're trying to create the next, car that flies, you're gonna need a lot of funds for that. So, money is a factor. And then, the third thing is, I just think about what it means. Like, is it a challenge? So one is I love the purpose and what I would do, but the other is what challenges are involved in my thinking. So I don't know if that answered your question, Mike, but I want to throw in product market fit, but it doesn't really go in what I calculate, my calculation. But yeah, is this a product that's going to solve, is it a painkiller, or is it a vitamin? Is it like a nice to have, or it's really going to solve pain? So I'm not interested in vitamins. Yeah, I'm interested in painkillers.
There's a question there.
Yeah.
Question?
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It was really wonderful, powerful.
Thank you.
I'm really curious to know, as a founder, where does rest show up in your practice? Like rest and regeneration. Where does it show up in your practice? And if you have to give advice to the future, the tomorrow, what would you give them about rest?
Well, I'm serious. I tell my team, take my advice. I'm not using it. Get some rest. So, what I'm saying is that it's hard to get rest when you're an entrepreneur and a founder. I just say it. There are things that need to get done. There are thoughts flying into your head. So it's self-care is something we talk about. And so you have to make time for it, build it in. I think also rest means different things for different people. It could just be like, sometimes I'll just zone out on a K-drama. I'll just binge the whole 16 episodes. But, it can mean different things. I tell my team, because burnout is so high in startups, super high. And I am always asking them, how are you feeling? How are you doing? What's happening? Is there something you don't want to be doing? Is there something you want to be doing? It's constant temperature checks, I think, to take care of your team. How do you do it, Mike?
So I think that's a really good question, actually, because I always tell people, the most important thing about entrepreneurship is to be healthy, because if you're not healthy, you just can't do it. Being an entrepreneur takes everything. So being healthy is really important. And if you're not getting enough mental, rest, sometimes your brain has to do just nothing. It has to reset and like you said, regenerate. So I think that, the effort of starting a business is not quick. It's a long, drawn-out marathon. And you have to be prepared for that. And that means that you have to get a certain amount of rest or break, or you won't be able to maintain that effort over the long term. So I think it's a really good question.
Yeah, really good.
Thank you.
So is this where I tell my 3 hours of sleep?
Thank you again.
And
Let's
3
give
hours. Thanks.
another round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you again for this opportunity. It really, really, really meant a lot for me. I've never shared my story in this way. So thank you.